Welcome to our webinar series on participation and representation in the digital age. My name is Jenny Oser, and I'm a professor of politics and government at Ben-Gurion University. I'm also the principal investigator of an ERC project on this topic, and I'm honored to introduce our speaker today, Professor Anja Neundorf of the University of Glasgow in the UK. Anja is a leading international scholar of political behavior, research methods, and comparative politics, and her outstanding scholarly contributions were recently recognized in her election as a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. She's currently leading an ERC Consolidator grant on the topic, Democracy Under Threat: How Can Education Save It? Anja's talk today will focus on her co-authored paper on the topic of promoting democracy through social media. To make the most of our time, here's how we'll run this webinar. First, Anja will speak for about a half hour. Second, I'll introduce our course panelists who prepared questions in advance based on a careful reading of the article. And third, we'll select questions that participants submit to us in the Q&A submission format that I'll put in the chat. So during the talk, we welcome you. Send your questions through this form for the panelists' review. A final technical note that I'll also put in the chat: if you'd like to see a written transcript during the webinar, we've enabled this feature and you can activate it by clicking on your Zoom screen's bottom right option labeled More and then click on Transcript. Thank you for joining us. And Anja, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks so much, Jenny, for inviting me and being part of this fantastic webinar series and talking about our research on promoting democracy through social media. Can you see my slides? Okay, yeah,
Yep.
good.
That's
Okay,
great.
perfect. So let me start with motivating, the need to talk more about democracy and reclaiming democracy as a concept, as a big idea. Here I show you a graph that plots the perception about how people from different countries evaluate how democratic their country is in using the most recent wave of the World Values Survey. So you see that here on the y-axis, yeah, the average evaluation of a country's level of democracy. On the x-axis, you see the VDEM score on liberal democracy. So let's say that's like the closest we can get to get at the how democratic a country actually is, right? And so if people, citizens would be, kind of correct in evaluating the democracy of their country, they all countries should line up on the 45-degree line, right? But what we see instead is there's no real relationship, yeah, between these two things of how democratic a country is and how their citizens perceive the political system. We see very autocratic countries being evaluated as very democratic by their citizens, while countries that are fairly democratic, are seen as much more critical by their citizens. So what this graph shows me is that there's a real need to go back to basics to understand what democracy is, how it works, and what makes a country democratic. Just because it's the Democratic Republic of Congo doesn't mean it is a democratic country, right? So this is kind of the puzzle. Like, why are so many people misjudging democracy even in their own country that they're experiencing? And this kind of goes back to some basic, if we're thinking about, how to strengthen democracy. And I'm using here, a famous quote by Larry Diamond, who's of course a very important scholar in this field, who said that for democracy to endure, their leaders and citizens must internalize the spirit of democracy. And when we're thinking about this, this is really about kind of how can people internalize the spirit of democracy. For this really, kind of to democracies to be stronger, to be more resilient, people need to love democracy. Yeah. And how do we love something? How do we become passionate about something and start identifying with it? Think about kind of any sports. Yeah. So I live in the UK, but I'm originally from Germany. Here they play cricket. I don't know whether you have cricket in Israel, but it was a sport I was not familiar with. And I just thought it was really weird to see these like men in white clothes standing around a field until somebody explained it to me, like what's the rules and so on. So this is really the first step. I never got passionate about cricket, but I understood why, some people are really into it. And, it's with like any board game or sports or democracy. We first need to understand it. We need knowledge to understand the rules, which player does what. And then once we understand that, this is when we really start valuing it and kind of identifying with it. And once we do that, we value something, this is when we're also ready to fight for it, right? So understanding knowledge is the key here. And this is kind of what we are trying to do in this project as well, that motivated us. How can we make a case for democracy, empowering people to become that shield, to become that resistance? And for this, we're turning to civic education. And, that's obviously not something new. Civic education programs, both in schools and also, for kind of outside school, has been around for a long time. The purpose of these programs is to promote knowledge, engagement, and, support norms developing, among ordinary citizens. But the challenge of civic education, or as it is more, kind of commonly called in the kind of international, communities, like democracy promotion, what we're talking about here in terms of adult education, is how do we design these programs to achieve these ambitious goals, right? There's certain challenges if we think about kind of traditional adult-focused civic education. First of all, it's often very limited. There's amazing programs out there. I mean, this field is very much, in risk with the kind of shutdown of US aid, which was one of the biggest funders of democracy promotion around the world. And this, kind of problem of like, how do we reach more people has probably become, even worse. But the problem is that a lot of these programs are often like in person. They're very creative, but they reach people that are already converted, right? And so we kind of stay within our ideological echo chambers. People are already motivated, self-select into these programs that are often small scale. And so we need to expand this. We need many more people to learn about democracy, to understand democracy, truly what it is, without being manipulated by autocratic leaders. And we need to reach people that are usually underrepresented and that are less politically engaged, right? Your group is very much also about representation and participation. So how do we reach these people? How do we draw them into politics? That's the first challenge. The second is, given how the funding and aid landscape has changed, we really need to find innovative, cost-effective method to convey these critical messages and kind of reach more people at the same time. This is exactly what we tried to do in this project, DEMET. And the idea here was to use social media to conduct civic education campaigns, which we believe offer a kind of cost-effective, wide-ranging method. Now, some of you might be like, hold on, social media is usually kind of perceived as a threat to democracy. And that's, an important debate, right? And there is some threat to it. I mean, the whole debate about X, clearly shows that, there are, threats that come from these platforms and so on. However, we believe that social media still, with all its pitfalls, has an enormous potential to be used as a kind of educational tool to reach many people in a cost-effective way. And the advantages are very clear. It has this massive reach. Even with all the problems that these platforms have, they still are used by billions of people everywhere in the world. There's very few countries that do not have Meta, for example. And also, interestingly, look at what's happening in Iran right now, right? Iran is reacting to the uprising and to this kind of trying to, suppress collective action by turning off the platforms. Yeah. And that is their control. They turn it off. You can't see it anymore. You can't coordinate with your, fellow citizens. But the state control of the content, especially when it comes to paid content on these platforms, is much more difficult to control even for autocratic states. Yeah. And so this is the advantage of using, in particular, social media advertisement campaigns. Yeah. And let me just kind of, and you also study communication, so you will be familiar with this, but just to kind of show you two maps of this enormous reach that Meta has. So I'm talking, as I said, Facebook here, but it's Meta really, like that includes Instagram. So this is a map with the number of regular users that use Meta platforms. And as you see, apart from, kind of Russia and China, North Korea and Cuba, these are the countries that don't really have Meta. But apart from this, there's billions and millions of people. If you look at proportion, so the proportion of a population that is active and uses these platforms regularly, the Americas are completely covered. Europe, North Africa, and also big parts of Asia are also reaching, big parts of the population. There is, of course, sub-Saharan Africa, which has, issues with internet access, for example. This is where it's less prevalent. So this is what we want to use, right? It is a global platform. How can we use the kind of reach and the strength of this to promote democracy worldwide? And so in this background, with the motivation of trying to achieve this, we came up with an experimental research design to test several short videos. They were about 3.5 minutes long. And the goal was of these videos to really, in an educational way, explain what is democracy, how does it work, why is it important to have, how does it protect, we had this kind of framing of why is democracy good for you? Yeah, what does it give you? And so all the different, we had like 3 different versions, kind of, I will, kind of show you in a minute, like framing the argument slightly different, but they all had a very similar structure and kind of, why is democracy better than autocracies, and kind of providing political rights, individual rights, economic rights. It was very neutral and abstract. We had one country comparison in here because we often think in comparative terms, right? So we illustrated the points by comparing Lithuania and Belarus that were both part of the Soviet Union until its downfall. Then they became independent countries. Lithuania became a democracy. Belarus stayed an autocracy, and we kind of showed. So here, this is the civil rights framing to promote democracy, and you kind of see using freedom of expression as an illustration, like Lithuania, like great, and Belarus not so great. So this is like the structure of these videos, and the idea here is, let's talk about what democracy is, why it's good, what does it bring you, and to see whether that works, right? Given that we had, a design where our treatments were basically just videos that were much less costly than if you do anything in person, it allowed us actually to vary a bit the interventions, which is quite uncommon because most of the work in this area uses in-person, treatments and interventions, and therefore it's much more difficult to vary this. But we try to see like different frames and to also compare that allows us to see which argument works best, how to make the case for democracy. I already showed you the screenshot for our video protecting civil rights, basically. Then we had one that is very kind of the core of what the checks and balances are when we talk about democracy, right? This is about the institutions. Why do we need independent parliaments and courts? What's their purpose? How do we benefit from this? Yeah, this is about this core idea of democracy, right? There's a constraint on the executive, and this is really key. And then we had one that was not so much about kind of how liberal democracy and these like kind of 2 components of rights and institutions work, but more about what can democracy deliver. Yeah, there's loads of research, showing that democracies usually outperform autocracies when it comes to the provision of public goods, welfare, environmental protection, economic growth, these kind of things. So the idea here is maybe people need an instrumental argument to be like, I want democracy because I'm going to be better off. Yeah. So maybe it's the economy in the end. Yeah. And then we had a control video that needed to be quite neutral because we ran this in different countries and cultures in the world. So we went for space, which seemed to be quite neutral. And there was just a, kind of short little video about the advantages of space exploration in a non-political way. It was more about kind of space tourism and, these kind of things. So this is kind of, the design, 3 treatments, 1 control. People were just randomly assigned to 1 watch of these videos, and then we wanted to see whether it works. As we conducted all of this online, it allowed us to run our study in many different countries. And here you see our country selection. We wanted to have a lot of variation in terms of how developed the countries are. So here you see the Human Development Index, which includes things related to poverty, economic, but also literacy, health indicators and so on. It's a quite rich indicator, and you see that we have nice variation from kind of quite poor countries to very rich countries. And then on the other hand, we wanted a good variation in terms of political systems. So we have quite hardcore autocracies in here as well, very closed autocracies, to the kind of very advanced democracy, and nice mix in the middle. And so you see that we have a good spread here, right? And the idea here is to also see, if we try to promote democracy, does it matter whether we promote democracy in an advanced, rich democracy, or whether we do that in a poor autocracy, or something in the middle? Is there a variation? Because that is something that we also haven't done. Usually, the studies that have looked at evaluating these programs are usually done in 1 country only. So what we then did is we used the power of social media to reach a lot of people at relatively low costs. So we bought advertisement on social media, on Meta, so that includes Facebook and Instagram. And we showed people this advertisement, just very simply saying, come and join our study in order to win a very generous voucher from Amazon, or if Amazon didn't exist in the country, we included, kind of the biggest online store in the country. So with this, people just click on it. They come to our Qualtrics survey that we programmed, and then we ask them kind of some questions about, like their gender and age and education, these kind of things. And then they were randomly shown the videos. And then afterwards, we asked questions relating to democratic norms and engagement and knowledge and so on. With this, we reached about 90,000 people that actually watched our videos. And as is normal with these kind of designs, you then have some dropouts that, not everyone completed the survey. And obviously, this is a convenient sample. This is not representative, right? We don't claim, and we don't even aim to have a representative sample here. Our comparison would be much better with, kind of the typical participant pool that, participates in these educational programs. And for this, our pool would be so much more diverse than any in-person program, yeah? So this is kind of the setup, how we collected the data, the treatments we had, and so on. So let me now show you our main results. This is a relatively simple statistical procedure. We have, individual level data. People are clustered in the country that they live in. So we do have country level clustered standard errors, even so it doesn't matter whether we use country fixed effects and so on. Here is just first some descriptive results. So to also kind of show you some of the outcomes that we're using to measure whether these interventions were effective or not. First, we had a question about, is it important to live in a democracy? And it is quite, I find it surprising in a way that, or maybe it isn't. In our control group, 81% of people participating on our survey say that they want to live in a democracy. Yeah, so it is something that people value. And of course, this is what autocrats also play with, is the power of the idea of democracy, right? Everyone wants democracy. Autocrats claim to be democratic. And this is kind of reflected here. We do see a slight increase in this, that our videos did make people want this even more. Maybe a harder test is a series of questions that we ask about, okay, do you support any of these other types of government? So we had military dictatorship, we had a strongman rule, we had a one-party system, and so on, right? And so the idea here is if you are a true Democrat, you should say, no, that's not democracy. A strongman rule or military ruling is not a democracy, and I reject this. You can see that only, it's like, look at this, like, this doesn't make sense, right? So 81% of people want to live in a democracy, but only 38% actually reject all these other types of authoritarianism. Yeah, you kind of see already there's a knowledge gap here, right? But look at this, this is a huge increase. Yeah, so if you see that from the baseline, this 6% difference here, that is quite substantial. Yeah, that people that watched our short videos did realize that these kind of forms of government, they are not to be supported. Yeah, they're not good. Then we had some knowledge questions about understanding what liberal democracy is and what its core components is beyond elections, because everybody has elections. Elections is not a defining feature anymore of what democracy is, right? And so you do see again kind of a substantial increase in understanding core components relating to rights and checks and balances and so on among those that did watch the videos. And then we have a small effect also on political participation, even so we wouldn't have expected that necessarily because our videos were not a kind of call for action, or they were not so much about participation. They were kind of more general about how does the system work, okay? Then, kind of in case you prefer stars, here are, the models with kind of the final, with all the covariates in and so on. But, you do see that there is kind of, some significant effects. And here we try to kind of get at the strength of this in terms of the effect sizes. I'm happy to go more over this, but kind of just to summarize this. So what we do see, and we have multiple, outcomes that we try to measure here, is we do see that generally democratic preferences are kind of boosted with our treatments. We also see this important reduction in support for non-democratic forms of governance. And we had a really interesting measure, I think, at least how we measured kind of a candidate selection where people were given like two different candidates to choose. One that represents their own interest in terms of partisanship, for example, and another one that is actually against their interest in terms of partisanship or policy preferences, but is democratic. And we see, this is the challenge, right? Like, why do people blindly follow their, kind of parties, even so they, start dismantling democracies in their country. So we need to overcome this. And our videos also helped to reduce this kind of blind following and rather like democracy trumping partisanship in a way. We increased knowledge and, a small extent enhancing political engagement. Then, kind of the criticism of these designs is that, people watch a video and then straight after we ask them, like, do you think democracy is great? It's like, yeah, sure. Do we believe that, right? So in one country, in Turkey, we boosted our sample very much compared to all the other countries to allow us to do a follow-up study. And what we did is, so we had our sample that was originally then, I think, kind of close to 15,000, 12,000, I think, in Turkey. And then we sent them invitations to complete two of our outcomes again, which is how important is it to live in a democracy? And we kind of measure that as a change variable because we also measured it before we showed them the videos. And then we have our index of rejecting all these authoritarian alternatives, right? And so we asked, kind of respondents, responded up to, kind of twice or three times more, kind of following watching the videos. And what you see is that, even like 10 days, or kind of even up to like 2 weeks after they watched a 3-minute video, we still see significant effects. Yeah. And, there's not much kind of decline here, right? It's just that we have fewer people who answered, much later, right? So this for me kind of gives me some confidence that this is not just, let's say, a demand effect where people say like, oh, just told me that democracy is great, so democracy is great, right? Because they went back to their everyday life, right? We even changed the mode. This was like texting them instead of kind of reaching them via social media. So for me, this is kind of one of the strongest indication that this is something that has, it does something, like it reminds people of something, right? Uh, the other, kind of motivation of our study was to look at country differences. And we had different like hypotheses registered about like country specific contextual effects, right? Like the level of democracy in the country and the economic development, these kind of things. And then what we find is it just works the same everywhere. Yeah, whether this is a rich country, a poor country, democratic country, an autocracy, it doesn't really matter, right? So Argentina, Australia, Honduras, Guatemala, these are very different countries, but the effects look really similar. We have, for example, Singapore is not significant, but Singapore, we had the smallest sample. It was very difficult to recruit there. And so the confidence intervals overlap. But if you look at the size of the effect, it looks also similar, right? So this is something that was puzzling because you kind of think there must be a difference with these different countries. But on the other hand, it's really positive, right? The message here is that these kind of interventions, they can work anywhere. Yeah, and they will have different effects, right? So in an advanced democracy, and we saw that in our pilot when we showed people the videos, and then we asked like, what do you think about this? In advanced democracies, people were like, this is like school, I know this. But maybe people don't, right? It's a kind of they do know this. They have learned it. They learned it through the media and the school and so on, but it's making it salient. It's bringing it to the forefront. Be reminded of what democracy is. While in all the kind of less developed countries in the pilot, the comments were like, wow, I never heard about this. This is, this was super interesting. So you clearly saw like the knowledge gap, right? So they learned something new. They were kind of, persuaded about kind of, or maybe some biases were corrected or what they thought democracy is and so on. So there's different mechanisms, but the effect, ultimately seems to be quite similar. And then something, kind of that, as I said, our design allowed us to do was to, sorry, one more thing about heterogeneity. We do see kind of, looking at, do these effects, do these, treatments work the same across, individuals? And what we see is that it works better among younger people and also the least interested. So that was a relief because I have, made a career of studying political socialization, which assumes that the formative years are the most, kind of impressionable. So that was good to find that indeed, these videos, as you see here, kind of with, like it's basically taking like, okay, if I show this video to a 20-year-old, this is the effect. Versus if I show this to a 60 or 80-year-old, then that's the effect, right? So there's a significant difference for age for most of the variables and also for political interest. So we're compensating for these people often not being reached, yeah, and talked to about politics. Okay, and then lastly, which frame worked best to make the case for democracy? The idea here was, and a lot of people, and we as well, expected that making an instrumental case for democracy will have the strongest impact. Yeah, because ultimately we're all just rational, right? We want money in our pocket and that's it. But the results, and no matter how we kind of tested this, clearly show that these two are much stronger. Yeah. And then we kind of went back because it was a bit surprising to see this. And then we went back to the literature after the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. Because the argument was always like, oh, they just wanted, better economic conditions. But if you actually look into the literature, they come to the same conclusion. They also, in the end, find what people wanted is rights. They wanted what is the core of democracy. More participation, more say, more rights. Yeah. And so this is, again, a very positive finding, right? It's not just about selling democracy. It's about, focusing on the core of what democracy is making the case for it, making people understand how it works, why it's important, and they can be convinced by this. Yeah. This is, also an important message for us. Let's focus on what democracy is and not only what it can deliver. Yeah. Uh, I had, just in case I was slower than expected, wanted to say something about this paper as well, but I'm just not going to do this. It's my backup. But yeah, so just to kind of wrap up, what we show in this paper is that these very brief, these are really just a few minutes, right? Low cost civic education intervention of trying to promote democracy can work. People do, seem to, react to this in the way we wanted. The good thing about this is it can easily be scaled up online. Yeah, there's, these platforms exist. There's others as well that we did not include here. We can reach so many people online. And this is exactly what all these malicious actors are doing already, right? We need the counter by promoting democracy and not just let that digital space kind of be taken over by, these forces that try to, undermine democracy. And we do also find in some of the, kind of other papers that, this works particularly well in more fragile, more polarized environments. So it can overcome polarization. The conclusion from our work is that, civic education is a powerful tool to combat democratic backsliding by building a more resilient citizens and helping people to understand the value of democracy better. Okay, I stop here, and then I'm very much looking forward to your questions.
Excellent, thank you. It was so impressive reading your paper in our class, and it's surprising when it's even more impressive to hear the results out loud. And we have some tough questions. We'll see. We'll keep you on your toes and welcome you to add in the paper that you wanted to discuss if we have time. I'll now introduce our course panelists in politics and government at Ben-Gurion University. Read the paper carefully, and they'll lead the Q&A together with me. The first question is from Shira Zahavi, who also studies communications. Shira.
First of all, thank you very much. I forgot to say I always read your one of the article, Mobilization for Democracy Under Authoritarianism, the Power of Social Media Campaigns. And it was really interesting to see the difference and the power of democracy also here. So the question is, you find that the effects of the video were consistent across very different political and economic contexts. Is your conclusion that there is no need to tailor the message to the unique context of each country, or it is impossible that videos could be even more effective if they are designed to be more context specific?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for this. So we had designed these videos to be very abstract and neutral and not to refer to any specific context or experiences and so on purpose, right? Because it was a cross-country design. And so we needed something that we can use the same, in video and kind of speak to these different audiences. However, we always expected exactly this, what you just said, right? That ultimately it will probably be more impactful if we relate the content to a specific country context. In the meantime, we did another study in Burkina Faso that was just published in PSRM, where we focused on a specific challenge of that regime, which is terrorism. Yeah. So this is a country that has high prevalence, continued widespread terrorism and a strongman dictatorship. So what we tried here is we created an additional video about the because we see that, the research on terrorism and support for democracy and kind of, and so on shows that when there's terrorist attacks, people crave strongman rule. Yeah. They want somebody to step in and just deal with it and not all this kind of complicated democratic decision making. This is kind of the expectation. Yeah. And so, but in reality, when you look at the evidence, democracies are much better at dealing with terrorism. Yeah. And so we created this video that is, again, very abstract, follows exactly the same structure as our other videos, but just kind of making the case why democracies are better at dealing with terrorism instead of a strongman rule. Yeah. And then we created the same video with the same arguments, but making it about Burkina Faso. Yeah. So instead of talking generally about like, oh, democracy, you know, we really kind of brought in examples. We had footage of like kind of recent terrorist attacks and how the government reacted and these kind of things. So we tried to use a similar script, yeah, but just making it very specific to Burkina Faso. And what happened? It completely backfired. Yeah, the context-specific video backfired, while the general terrorism video worked really well. And why is this? So I think when we make something very specific to a context, there will be some people that this will speak to, and some people will feel, you know, kind of partisan loyalties, protective. It will trigger things. Yeah. I think when we talk too closely to things that we experience, all kind of emotions and own experiences will kind of come to the mix. And so this like the conclusion, and we saw that also in the comments again in the pilot, you know, that people started talking about the government specific events, you know, they had very strong reactions. So that's the first kind of empirical finding with a follow-up study, why I would say actually maybe it doesn't work. And there's a second argument why I think staying abstract is okay, because what we you know, kind of where is this work most important? If you think about it, probably in authoritarian contexts to counter propaganda and so on, right? And I didn't talk about the other paper now, but this is where we studied our videos in Turkey specifically. And they worked really well again. And we could even like, this is where we also included vote intention for the AKP. Yeah. And also like to ask this question again, like how democratic is Turkey? And we could correct the misperception about how you know democratic people think Turkey is. And we could reduce the vote intention for the AKP, even among regime voters. And 65% of the effect to not vote for AKP was basically mediated through understanding that Turkey is not very democratic. So that's a really powerful finding. But why does this matter, right? In a country like Turkey, you don't want to produce a video saying Erdogan is wrong. Turkey is not a democracy. You can't say that. Any organization doing that will be in trouble. Yeah. And so this abstract way of framing these videos, of just making it educational without talking to the specific context, can help to overcome censorship, any kind of backlash against any organization doing this. And it's a protection, and it still works because we were so baffled by the strong effects that we even did a follow-up study, and we showed these videos again to people in Turkey, and we asked them like, what do you think? Like we had like some questions about this video made me think about Turkey, that we can, live better, that may, these kind of things. So we clearly showed that even staying abstract, people were able to make the connection to their own context, and probably better than talking too specifically about the context, because then you have all the backlash and all the polarization coming out. Yeah. So so abstract is fine. Stay abstract.
Amazing.
Thank
And
you.
you have all the studies to prove it.
Yeah, yes. We've been doing this for 5.5 years, so yes.
Excellent. Our next question is a bridge to thinking about context in a different way. Is from Zainab Hardan, who studies also communication. Zainab.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you, Anja. It was really engaging. And moving on to the question is, we know that in other work that you have studied the in-person civic education programs. I wonder if you have insights on how the online democracy promotion videos that are the focus of this study compared to the in-person civic education programs in terms of their success to promoting to democracy?
Yeah, I mean I think that's a really, really important question now for us, and we're actually working on this right now. So no results yet. We're working on it. So we're currently in preparation of the last kind of study of this, group of studies to trial a media literacy training. So we got kind of stepping away from promoting democracy, but doing something slightly more concrete, which is combating mis and disinformation. We teamed up with a really amazing organization here in the UK called Shout Out UK. It's a kind of advocacy training group that does a lot of like media and political literacy training. And we designed a study with the same content on media literacy, but we will deliver it in different ways. So we have like a 1 hour very interactive in-person workshop. We will have a live interactive webinar, a bit like this, right? You have an instructor from Shout Out UK, and then people can interact, they can ask questions, there will be little exercises. Then we will have a pre-recorded lecture where you have like just somebody taking the same slides, but just kind of giving a lecture and then putting it on YouTube, right? Very common as well. And then we also produced a short 3-minute video of the same content in the way that you would see on social media. And then we kind of came up with an experimental design where we have always a control group to test the effectiveness of each of these 4 different versions. Yeah. So you have to invite me again, and then I can tell you. But no, I'm
We'd
kidding.
love to.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that is something we need to know, right? We need to understand there's advantages of doing things in person. Absolutely. You can really build a much stronger rapport. I would assume that that's the strongest effect. People will, I mean, you're students, right? Think about kind of your online lecture versus your, kind of you sit in a classroom with Jenny and like, it's like 20 of you or whatever, 15, and you really interact, you see each other, you chat afterwards. That's a different experience. Yeah, I understand that, but it's smaller, right? Online, we reach potentially millions. So, how to scale this, how's the trade of this? And so I think that's an important question for us that we really need to know and understand. But yeah, we're on it.
Yeah. We're not worried. Yeah. And our next question, I think, also builds on the question of how that education happens in different ways and modalities. This question is from Coyote Ina, who is in our MA program in African Sustainable Communities. Coyote.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anja, for that presentation. I heard from you, and I also did an article. I also presented an article on advertisement online surveys and how the advertisement height affects the survey outcomes. And it's nice to really, really hear and learn from you today. Quite a bit. You've answered quite my first question, so I just go to the second question. The video exposes treatment is framed as a form of civic education. Can you clarify how you think the idea of civic education differs from what others might call an advertisement or even propaganda?
That's a tough question that we also had debates with our reviewers with. And in the original title of this paper, we actually used the term civic education, and then we changed it to promoting democracy. And that was for a reason, because when we think about civic education, I think most people kind of have something much more formal in mind, right? Maybe they think more about school and more about kind of the in-person events, yeah? While what we are doing here is, it is educational. This is how we see it. This is how we think that the power comes from education, yeah? But it is still, a kind of maybe it's a form of a kind of advertisement campaign. It's you could probably say it is a form of propaganda. Propaganda, the way we use it is, of course, something very negative. We think about malicious actors using propaganda. But I sometimes provocatively say, democracy needs a propaganda campaign. Yeah, we as the democratic actors, maybe need to use the same powerful tools in terms of entertainment, emotions, and for me, the power of education is that is our tool to remind people about the value of democracy and not to fall for the propaganda from the other side, right? To understand it better. So I think the lines are blurred there of what to name it, but I don't think we should shy away from thinking about, we need a big propaganda or, social media campaign or, educational campaign, however you want to call it, to do this and hopefully remind everyone about what democracy is.
Nice. Definitely provocative. I could see that would lead to conversations with reviewers and broader colleagues as well.
Yeah.
Related, our next question is from Yotam Omer, who also studies communication. Yotam.
Hello, and as my peers said, thank you so much for this research. Was very insightful. And my question also relates to country context, which you discussed a bit before. So your research investigates whether the video effects differ from some features of country context. And I'm curious if you have any insights about how effects may differ in countries that have high levels of polarization. For example, Israel.
Mhm. So we have another paper that was published in the British Journal of Political Science last year, where we look specifically at that question. So we have one of our outcomes that we measured was in a way, the problem of polarization, right? What polarization does is that we don't evaluate politicians anymore on what they do, how competent they are, how good they are for the country, but simply on this effective identity to, he is on my team or she is on my team, and therefore, no matter what they're doing, I'm going to vote for them. That's the danger of polarization. And how can we break this, right? So there was, really interesting studies about trying to remind people very explicitly, but your guy is doing something undemocratic. You really want to vote for him. This doesn't work. Again, backlash, right? Loyalty. So what we do instead is, if the calculus is, am I voting for my co-partisan or am I stronger in trying to protect democracy? It doesn't work to remind people about, stay away from partisanship. It's too polarizing. It's too, emotional. But what if we remind people about the value of democracy? This is what we do, right? And so we included questions before we showed the videos about effective polarization. So we asked them, to rate the different parties. So we have, the kind of standard, way of measuring how polarized an individual is. Yeah. Because they really love their party and they hate everyone else, right? And then we measured an outcome where we pitted two candidates against each other. We showed them a candidate that is from their party, which we know because they told us already. But this candidate is doing something undemocratic, like he's trying to restrict media freedom or the courts or something like this. And then we pair that with a candidate from another party that they don't like that much, but that candidate is trying to prevent this and trying to preserve democracy, right? And so what we want to see is that people overcome their partisan tendency and vote against their partisan interest for the other candidate because democracy trumps partisanship. Yeah, and we show that and this works the best. Hold on, I do actually have the graph here. Let me show you. I did include that. Where is it?
You already had it in the slides even.
I'm prepared. So here you see kind of the likelihood, we call that defending democracy because that's what it is in a way, right? You defend democracy against your partisan loyalty. So people that are not very polarized, they're much more likely to vote for the right candidate, the democratic candidate. And then you see here the control video. That's the problem with polarization, right? The more polarized you are, the less likely you are to vote against your partisan. But our videos reduce that a bit. It's still there, but it's at least less. And we show that for individuals, Yeah, that the higher polarization is, the more effective polarized people are. We do see that reduction in this negative effect, and we see the same for countries. So our interventions worked best in reducing this effect in countries that are most polarized, where it's most needed. Yeah. So this is a paper that is out in BJPS. So if polarization is something that interests you, there's more data in there. But yes, it works, and it can help.
Exciting.
But again, this is where it's most important to stay abstract, to stay neutral, not to talk about country context. I would say, yeah.
No, and remarkable, similar to the low interest individual, right? That the treatment is working where it's needed the most, right?
Yeah.
I believe we may have one more question from our student panelists before we open it up to questions that participants have submitted. Ansem, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
of course. First of all, thank you for the great webinar. It was really interesting for me to hear your research. And my question is that, like, your study shows that short online videos can positively influence democratic attitudes, but that these effects tend to fade over time. So, based on your findings, do you see social media mainly as a short-term tool for democracy promotion, or do you think it has the potential to foster more durable democratic commitment when combined with other forms of civic education? And that's the question.
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, we so far have only conducted kind of one shot, you once, watch a video like this. I would expect that a sustained exposure to content like this will hopefully have a kind of reinforcing effect. But this is something that we haven't tested and that we, for the moment, not planning to do. However, the way public opinion works is like we cannot pay attention to everything all the time, right? So what really matter is salience. Yeah, we kind of raise the importance of certain issues that we put on the political agenda, and that kind of then become really important when we think about who to vote for, yeah, what to prioritize, and so on. And so I think the timing of an online campaign like this can be really important. So we show, for example, in the Turkey study that we reduced vote intention for the AKP even among regime voters by 5-6%. That's a lot. That's massive, yeah. But imagine you do that during the election campaign. This was a very simple video about what is democracy, yeah, not anything about Turkey. And so imagine you do a really big online campaign of like flooding the platforms, with these kind of short videos of reminding people, if our results hold, it could in a way sway elections, because even in these electoral autocracies, elections are so incredibly important. It is their foundation of legitimacy. That is the foundation of why they claim to be democratic. And so imagine you do something like this, and even if it just sways a few percentage points, the 2023 election in Turkey was relatively tight. Yeah, even with a very unknown, boring, opposition candidate. So I think that it's about timings. It's about kind of when do we do this. It needs to be at crucial periods when it matters, to remind people. It's exactly the same with the polarization results, right? We need to remind people that there is a trade-off, and we need to, kind of tilt the weights towards reminding people about ultimately, any partisan competition is in a democratic system. So that sits above partisanship. We need to remind people of this. Yeah. And then hopefully with even just a few percentage points difference during election campaigns, maybe can make a difference.
We had really interesting questions that came in from participants. It's wonderful to have researchers also from Israel, also from all over the globe here who study these topics with us. We'll take 2 of these questions as we wrap up. So first, we'll hear from Dr. Liran Harzgor from Haifa University. Liran?
Hi, Anja.
Hi, Lara. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. And I heard your talk before about these studies, and it's amazing every time to hear about them. So I have a question relating a bit to the polarization question, but I was wondering, especially from the Israeli context, but maybe not only Israel, when you think about getting the message advocating for liberal democracy, and it doesn't have to be from your political side or the opponent, but the mere idea of liberal democracy in Israel is already identified with a certain political side. So you say that an abstract message works the best, but what happens when you deliver the message about civil rights or anything about liberal democracy, that people already from the other side, or the ones who support the populist leaders, don't want to hear you because they already know you come from the elite, or you come from the side that supports liberal democracy?
I mean, you obviously know much better the situation in Israel and in the conflict between the different sides and so on. But I would suspect that it is not so different to Turkey. Yeah, I mean, this is a really, really polarized context as well. And very clearly, right, with Erdogan being a strongman ruler, he has the power, and especially when it comes to, these issues like civil liberties. Yeah. And it still worked, right? His supporters still reacted to it. So I would suspect that maybe it's about kind of this careful crafting of the message to avoid the backlash. But given kind of what we see in the data, it did really work all across the globe. And so unfortunately we didn't include Israel, which probably was a mistake because we could run it. We could run it because a lot of Israelis speak English, right? So yeah, we could have probably included it. But yeah, we could do it again and try, The
I was
videos
just
are
going to
there.
say, there's always next step research. Let's do it.
Exactly.
That's great. Excellent. Well, we'll wrap up with one last question that combines a few questions that came in from participants from all over about the process of this really huge undertaking. And Coyote, if you could ask that question for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I wanted to ask also what area or what phase did you find most difficult doing this research, and how you managed to overcome? Because I'm currently doing my research also.
Okay, yeah, great question. Probably the development of the videos. Yeah, like how do you sell democracy? How do you make the case? It took us for a long time and different trials, to kind of find the right tone. We wanted it to be positive. These videos they're all on our website, so feel free to kind of watch them or use them or do whatever. We're very kind of open about it. But yeah, it was really difficult to kind of find the arguments, to find the right visuals, to find the right music, these kind of things, just to, being aware of all the sensitivities around this, that we wanted it to be educational, but at the same time powerful. And that's not so easy. So yeah, I think that was probably the biggest challenge.
Well, we watched one of those videos in class, and we highly recommend other people watching them. And that was one of our questions: was how was the process of it? So interesting to hear that among the challenging phases. So Excellent. Well, thanks to Anja, thanks to our course panelists and everyone who joined us in this last webinar of our first semester. We're very pleased to share with you as we wrap up a sneak preview to our next semester, which is just as fabulous as this one has been. So we're looking ahead in the spring in April to welcoming Stefan Walgrav, talking about how politicians evaluate public opinion. In May, we're having Don Green and Samra Sevi talking about AI, artificial intelligence in politics. And in June, Catherine de Vries from the IU University in Spain talking about gender attitudes and political engagement. So we look forward to seeing you next time. And thanks again, everyone who joined us.